The shuttle descended through layers of thick ochre clouds. Inside, a group of 12 young cadets from the Galactic Federation peered through the viewports, their various species-typical complexions, some scaled, some furred, some a pale, translucent blue, paling to a uniform shade of anxiety. This was the final phase of their training, the Crucible, a month-long survival exercise on a world specifically engineered to be a nightmare. Their instructor, a grizzled Xylosian named Commander Thrax, stood at the front, his 4 arms crossed. His voice was a gravelly rumble that needed no translation device to convey its seriousness. "You have studied the brief," he said, his multifaceted eyes scanning the nervous cadets. "Planet designation, KR-117. Unofficial name, the Gauntlet. The atmosphere is breathable. But that is the only courtesy it offers. The flora is aggressive. The fauna is designed to be the apex predator of your worst nightmares. The ecosystem has been tailored to target the psychological and physiological weaknesses of Federation species. Fear is a tool, cadets, and on the Gauntlet, the planet itself is the weapon." He gestured to a screen displaying a topography map, overlaid with blinking red threat zones. Photosynthetic vines that can sense your body heat. Swarms of insect-like creatures that induce paralytic terror with their sonics. A large territorial predator we call the Mind Eater. It doesn't eat your mind, but its roar triggers a primal, overwhelming dread. Your objective is simple. Survive for 30 standard days. A beacon at the northern pole will signal your extraction. Your only equipment is the standard-issue survival suit on your back and a multi-tool. Any questions? A Vorgit cadet, his skin shifting through nervous color patterns, raised a clawed hand. "Sir, what is the purpose of subjecting us to a psychologically manipulated environment? Isn't tactical skill enough?" Thrax's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. "Tactical skill is useless if you are frozen in fear, cadet. We need soldiers who can think, who can act, even when every instinct screams at them to run and hide. The Gauntlet will find your fear. It will exploit it. Your task is to conquer it." The shuttle lurched as it entered the atmosphere, and the viewports were swallowed by the swirling vomit-colored sky. The only cadet who hadn't reacted was a human, the sole representative of his species in the group, and his name was Kai. He was lean, with the unremarkable build of someone who hadn't been enhanced by centuries of genetic tailoring, unlike some of the others. While his comrades shifted and fidgeted, he sat perfectly still, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He was looking at the chaotic, threatening sky not with fear, but with the quiet appraisal of a craftsman examining a new material. The shuttle touched down on a patch of gray, spongy ground with a final, shuddering thump. The ramp hissed open, and a wave of humid, organic-smelling air washed over them. It carried the scent of rot, of damp earth, and something else. A cloying, sweet perfume that was somehow more unsettling than the rot. "Go!" Thrax barked. "Your 30 days begin now!" The beacon is that way." He pointed a thick arm towards a distant mountain range, its peaks shrouded in the perpetual gloom. The shuttle door slammed shut, and the craft lifted off, vanishing into the clouds with a whine, leaving the 12 cadets alone in the oppressive silence of the Gauntlet. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was broken by the distant, guttural roar of something huge. It wasn't just loud, it resonated in their chests, in their skulls, and a wave of pure, instinctual fear washed over them. The Vorgit cadet, Plex, let out a whimpering chirp. The Frenian twins, connected by a psychic link, broadcast a wave of shared panic that made the air feel thick. They were all frozen, the Mind-Eater's roar doing exactly what it was designed to do. All except Kai. He was looking around, not at the horizon where the roar came from, but at the ground near his feet. He knelt down, poking the spongy moss with a finger. He picked up a small gray rock turning it over in his hand. He sniffed the air again, this time with a curious, not fearful expression. "What are you doing?" hissed a tall, insectoid Creel cadet named Click. "We need to find shelter. That was the Mind-Eater. We should be moving away from it, not gardening." Kai looked up, his grin widening just a fraction. "That roar," he said calmly. "It's designed to trigger a fear response, but listen, there's no echo. It came from a ridge line about 2 clicks that way across an open plain. A predator that wants to eat you uses stealth. This thing is using a psychological weapon. It's a herder. It wants to frighten prey into a specific direction." He stood up and brushing the gray moss from his knee. "It's probably driving something towards the others, or driving us away from something else." He pointed towards a dense thicket of purple-leaved trees. "It roared from the open plain, so the safe direction our instincts are screaming at us to run is probably into that forest, which is exactly where it wants us to go. So we don't do that." The logic was so simple, so devoid of the panic that gripped them, that it cut through the fog of fear. It was the first time any of them had looked at the planet's design as a puzzle to be solved rather than a horror to be endured. The group, now reluctantly following Kai's lead, skirted the edge of the plain, keeping to a rocky, uneven terrain that was hard to traverse but offered no easy ambush points. As they moved, the planet continued to test them. A vine, shimmering with heat, lashed out from a crevice. The others recoiled, but Kai was already moving, grabbing the vine just below its snapping head. He didn't try to fight it. He just held on, letting it pull him for a second, then used its own momentum to rip it from its shallow root system. He held up the wriggling plant. "It's a heat seeker. Our suits mask our thermal signature a little, but not completely. But see how it reacts to sudden movement? It's an ambush predator. In the open, it's just a worm." He tossed the vine aside. Later, when a swarm of the sonically terrifying insects found them, their chittering building into a frequency that made the Frenian twins collapse, clutching their heads, Kai didn't run. He didn't clamp his hands over his ears. He just watched them for a moment, then took a deep, slow breath. "The fear is a broadcast," he shouted over the din. "It's keyed to sensitive frequencies. Your panic makes you more vulnerable. Focus on a different sense. Touch. Feel the ground beneath you, the wind on your face. Ground yourselves in the physical." He walked calmly into the center of the swirling swarm, and though the sound was clearly painful, he didn't flinch. He simply lit a small piece of the gray moss he'd pocketed. It didn't burn with a flame, but smoldered, producing a thick, acrid smoke. The insects recoiled from it instantly. "The moss is full of a resin," he explained as the swarm dispersed. "It's their repellent. The planet's ecosystem is full of checks and balances. You just have to look." By the end of the first week, the other 11 cadets were still alive, a fact they attributed entirely to Kai. They had built a small, defensible shelter in a cave behind a waterfall. Kai had shown them which bioluminescent fungi were edible and which would make them hallucinate. He had taught them to read the subtle shifts in the wind that preceded a Mind-Eater's roar, giving them time to brace for it, to treat it as a weather event rather than a terror attack. One evening, as they huddled together, Plex the Vorgit looked at Kai, who was calmly sharpening a piece of bone against a rock. "Kai," he said, his color patterns a steady, respectful blue. How are you not afraid? This world was engineered to terrify us. It targets our deepest instincts." Kai paused, looking at the flames of their small, carefully managed fire. The grin that was always present softened into something more thoughtful. "It's not that I'm not afraid," he said quietly. "I feel it. Well, when that thing roars, my heart tries to climb out of my chest, just like yours. The difference is, my species has been doing this to ourselves for our entire history." He looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "We've engineered our own worlds to be lethal. Not just the physical ones, but the social ones, the economic ones. We create systems of competition and pressure that are designed to break people. We tell each other from birth that we're not good enough, that we have to fight for every scrap, that failure means oblivion. Every human lives their entire life in a crucible of our own making. He gestured vaguely at the dark jungle beyond the waterfall. This place, it's honest. The threat is real, the danger is clear. It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't tell you that you're worthless while you're struggling to survive. It just is. You adapt or you don't. You solve the problem or the problem solves you. It's simpler. The cadets stared at him, a new kind of chill running down their spines. They had been trained to fear the engineered horrors of the gauntlet. But the horror they now felt was for Kai's species, a race that had apparently learned to be comfortable in a nightmare because their own reality was so much more insidious. They were looking at a creature that had been forged not in a week on a hostile planet, but in a lifetime in a hostile civilization. And he was grinning because for the first time the rules of the game made sense. The second half of their trial, however, was about to show them just how deep that human ability to adapt could go. Because on the gauntlet, the threats weren't static. The planet learned. And as they entered the third week, the planet seemed to change its strategy. The open, predictable attacks stopped. The Mind Eater's roars became less frequent, more distant, as if it was being called away. The aggressive flora seemed to wilt. An unnatural quiet settled over the landscape, a silence more terrifying than any roar. It began with their water source. The stream that ran past their cave, which they had tested and deemed safe, turned brackish and poisonous overnight. Kai, examining the upstream area, found the ground scorched and a faint, acrid smell in the air. "Something's changed the water chemistry," he said, his brow furrowed for the first time. "This isn't natural. It's a systemic attack." Then the game vanished. The small, rodent-like creatures they had been trapping were gone. The fungi they relied on stopped growing, and their patches turning to black, crumbling dust. The very food sources of the ecosystem were being systematically eliminated, and they were being eliminated with them. The planet was no longer just throwing monsters at them. It was turning off the life support. Hunger became a constant gnawing presence. The Franian twins, weakened, struggled to maintain their psychic shielding, and the ambient fear pressure of the planet began to seep into their dreams, giving them terrifying visions. Click the Creel became paranoid, accusing the others of hoarding resources. Plex's color patterns became a permanent, sickly gray of despair. It was Commander Thrax who finally appeared, his shuttle descending without warning into the small clearing near their cave. The ramp lowered, and he stood there, his 4 arms folded. He looked at their gaunt faces, their hollow eyes, and a flicker of what might have been satisfaction crossed his alien features. "Your 30 days are not up," he said bluntly. "But the exercise parameters have changed. The planet's central intelligence has registered your adaptive strategies. It has determined that direct confrontation is ineffective against your unit. So, it has shifted to a siege. It is systematically dismantling the environment's ability to support you. Starvation, dehydration, and psychological collapse are now the primary vectors of attack. In 3 days, if current trends continue, you will all be dead." He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over them before settling on Kai. "The purpose of this phase is to teach you that an enemy will adapt. Your clever tricks will only work for so long. The gauntlet is now a puzzle with no solution. There is no food, no water, and no way to fight back against an entire planetary system. This is the final lesson, the acceptance of defeat." He gestured back towards the shuttle. "You have passed the first phase admirably, but the crucible is not about survival. It's about knowing when survival is impossible. You may all board. You have earned a pass for your ingenuity." A wave of profound relief washed over the cadets. Plex actually chirped with joy and started moving towards the ramp. The Frenian twins clung to each other, tears of gratitude in their eyes. They were saved. The nightmare was over. But Kai didn't move. He stood his ground, looking not at the shuttle, but at the grim, silent forest. His expression was no longer one of calm appraisal. The grin was gone, replaced by something harder, a glint in his eye that looked a lot like defiance. "A puzzle with no solution," he repeated, his voice low. "Who decides that?" Thrax's mandibles clicked. "The intelligence that governs this planet. It has run millions of simulations. It has calculated every possible variable. There is no food, no water, and no alternative source within a viable travel distance. You are beaten, cadet. It's not a failure. It's a lesson." "Your simulations," Kai said, stepping past Thrax and walking a few paces towards the tree line. "They're based on the parameters of the cadets who have come before us, on the biology and psychology of Federation species." He knelt down and began scraping at the gray, rocky soil with his multi-tool. "What's the one variable your simulations don't have?" Thrax was silent for a moment. "See, the Central Intelligence is adaptive. It has observed you for 3 weeks. It has cataloged your species' physical resilience, your problem-solving skills. It has accounted for you." Kai looked over his shoulder, and that unsettling grin was back, wider than ever. "Has it accounted for what we'll eat?" He stood up, holding a small, wriggling thing he'd unearthed. It was a pale, eyeless grub, covered in a slick mucus. It was utterly repulsive. The other cadets recoiled, but Kai just popped it into his mouth and crunched down, a look of intense concentration on his face. He swallowed. "High in protein," he said calmly. "Bitter, but not toxic. The soil here is rocky, but it's volcanic in origin. Volcanic soil is rich in minerals. Things live in it, deep down where the scans don't look. The planet engineered the surface, the flora. The megafauna. It forgot about the dirt." He scraped up another handful of soil, letting it sift through his fingers. He pointed to a faint, darker streak in the rock face near their cave. "That's a seam of iron ore. We can't eat it, but we can use it. And that," he said, pointing to a clump of the gray, spongy moss they had used for insect repellent, "isn't just a repellent. When you dry it and crush it, it's highly fibrous, not nutritious, but it'll give our stomachs something to work with. It'll stop the cramps." He turned to face the stunned cadets and the speechless commander. "A siege only works if the thing inside the walls has nowhere to go and nothing to eat. You're right, Commander. The planet cut off our supplies, but it forgot that we're not just on the planet. We're in it. We're part of it. And on Earth, we've learned to survive in deserts, in Arctic wastes, on the open ocean. We've learned to eat the bugs, the dirt, the things that no sane creature would consider food. Because when you have nothing, everything is something." The other cadets stared, their relief turning into a dawning, horrified awe. They had been ready to give up, to accept the simulation's verdict. But Kai had simply redefined the terms of the game. The question wasn't, "Is there food?" but, "What can I make into food?" The gauntlet had tried to starve a human. It had failed to account for the one thing that defined humanity, a relentless, almost perverse refusal to die. The final days were the hardest. They chewed on the fibrous moss, a tasteless, sawdust-like paste. They learned to dig for the pale grubs, and to crush the iron-rich rocks and leach the mineral dust into their meager water supply to stave off anemia. They were constantly hungry, constantly tired, but they were alive. They adapted. They followed Kai's lead, not because he was fearless, but because he refused to accept the world as it was given to him. He insisted on reshaping it, on finding opportunity in desolation. On the 30th day, the extraction shuttle arrived. They emerged from their cave, gaunt, filthy, and exhausted, but standing on their own 2 feet. Commander Thrax was waiting for them. He looked at the 12 cadets, his gaze lingering on Kai. "The Central Intelligence has logged an anomaly," he said. his voice devoid of its usual gruffness. "It has declared this simulation a critical failure. It cannot account for your survival. It has requested that your species be barred from future crucible exercises, as your presence breaks the predictive models." He paused. "I have never seen that happen." He then did something no one had ever seen a Xylosian commander do. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect among his people. "You have not just passed the crucible, you have redefined it. You have shown that fear is not the opposite of courage, it is a fuel, and that a world engineered to be a weapon can be disarmed by a mind that refuses to be a victim." As they boarded the shuttle, Plex walked beside Kai. He looked at the receding ochre surface of the gauntlet, the world that had tried so hard to break them. "Will you miss it?" he asked quietly. Kai looked back, a thoughtful expression on his face. He saw not a nightmare planet, but a challenge he had met and conquered. He saw a reflection of the struggle his own species had engaged in for millennia, not against alien worlds, but against the ones they built for themselves. "Miss it?" Kai said, the familiar, indomitable grin returning. "No, but I'll remember it. It reminded me of something important." "What's that?" Plex asked. Kai looked away from the window and met the Vorgit's curious gaze. "That the dark doesn't last forever, and even when it does, you can still learn to see in it." The shuttle broke through the cloud layer, and for the first time in a month, the warm, honest light of a normal star washed over them. And for Kai, that was enough.